Hey, everybody, and welcome back to the show. We talk all the time on the show about the world of security and integrating different types of security, whether that's cybersecurity, IT, physical security, and how that world blends with the hardware side of things. And for a long time in our industry, those ideas and those workflows sort of lived separately and were almost disparate. But now we're having conversations with decision makers across all sorts of different security postures and portfolios where, hey, my IT team needs to work with my CSO and my school safety team needs to also work with the hardware and technology team. So we found as our industry continues to expand that those conversations have to increasingly bridge that gap between that digital and that physical side of not only just security, but things like alerting and mass notification. So wanted to dig in a little bit more today into that topic. So I brought on somebody who's a little bit smarter about that than I am. And that's Chris Utah, COO and co-founder of Regroup Mass Notification. Chris, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate you having us today.
Absolutely. Well, Chris, I sort of teased it off the top, right? But you get to see this every single day. There's this demand nonstop for this integration in our security installations for interconnectivity between our hardware and our PA systems and our digital signage and our locks and the digital side of that as well, right? Being able to interpret things like data and put in things, to help identify potential threats. And for so long, they have been just total disparate sources, right? And we're sort of hitting our stride right now as an industry where, hey, not only is our industry, helping support that from a technology standpoint, but we're having to teach and manage and educate end users to help support that. So I want to ask, really at a high level, how have you seen sort of these worlds collide, and what are some of the ways, even just from a day-to-day perspective, that you guys get to have some of those conversations?
Yeah, so we saw it early on. I think we were blessed in that regard. I think there were a lot of players in the space who were trying to be all things to all people and trying to create something that everyone would adopt. And what we saw then is the same thing that we're seeing now, and that is, every organization is different. Every organization has different devices and platforms and systems that they want to integrate. So integration really is the name of the game, and we're seeing that across the board, from access controls to visual alerts, public address systems needing to integrate with our software, and so that's been really important for us to be able to provide to our clients over the years, and I think in large part has helped us find a fair degree of success.
Well, I want to ask too. I mean, obviously, you think about the world of safety and security that historically has sort of fallen in the facilities or the security operations, or even operations in general, side of a lot of businesses. But now you see really an influx of IT stakeholders, of technology stakeholders, of folks that are managing devices on a day-to-day basis. How have you seen that not only decision maker profile change, but how have you seen that kind of need expand even across maybe some traditional applications in security?
Yeah, so the profile has definitely changed. I remember in the early days we were typically working with folks on the IT side, and there's so much bleed over from department to department these days. It's just as common and just as likely that we'll be dealing with someone on the security side. Again, depending on the type of organization, we've even had a lot of interaction with HR professionals. And so it seems like folks across departments are delving more and more and have a deeper understanding into IT infrastructure. And so it's been interesting. The conversation has shifted, the personas have shifted, and that's something that we've seen the steady march towards here for several years now.
Well, I want to stay on the topic of IT for a second, because you're right. It's not unique to have conversations with IT professionals, especially when it comes to networking, wireless connectivity, things like that. But what's been interesting to see is a pretty dramatic pivot to integrating a lot of the hardware side of things into the world of IT, whether that be, like you mentioned, PA and audio alert systems or visual alert systems. So those, the digital systems sort of used to try and live in its own isolated place, and now you actually have technologies integrated into existing IT infrastructures. What are some of the reasons that you've sort of seen that, and what are some of the challenges and even opportunities that you've seen kind of pop up as we really look to integrate a lot more of the physical hardware side of things into the IT spectrum?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it comes from key security concerns that we've seen, especially in larger organizations. So there are concerns, of course, about integrating physical access systems with AV alert hardware, and so I think some of those concerns really are around unauthorized access and the vulnerabilities that exist when you start getting into third-party applications, because in effect, what you have is a patchwork of third-party systems being brought together. More moving parts, generally equals more opportunities for failure. And with all of the IT cybersecurity threats that we're facing and that we're reading about in the headlines, those tend to really undergird the concerns that a lot of these organizations have. I think a lot of the integrations and a lot of the decisions being made around those integrations are being driven by those underlying concerns.
Well, I'm curious too. One of the really cool things about whether it be emergency alert technology or really smart technology in general from a security standpoint is that you kind of get to have a two-way conversation between the technology and the software or the application and then back to the technology. One example that comes to mind is, say I'm in a school, there you have smart lock solutions now where, hey, if the school goes into lockdown, it'll just automatically lock all the doors, right? There's a lot of different ways that you could leverage that technology. But as you have more IoT devices like that on the network, and even emergency alerts to kids on their cell phones, right? It introduces a lot of those vulnerabilities. How have you seen the IT folks sort of bridge that gap between, hey, we need to have these connected devices because it gives us more flexibility and security, and obviously from emergency alerts to phones and things like that. But how do you balance that sort of vulnerability and risk with the, hey, we need a really hardened IT infrastructure that is impenetrable in most cases?
Yeah, and I think kind of an impenetrable IT infrastructure is, when I hear that, and you hear that sometimes when you're going back and forth and you're working with a prospect to more clearly define or more realistically define what their requirements are. I think of bulletproof, right? There's nothing that's bulletproof. There's nothing that's truly impenetrable, especially in the civilian sector in which we operate. So I think it's sometimes it's expectation setting. I think sometimes when we write a requirement list for an RFP or a project that we're working on, it's nice to be able to say that you want everything to be impenetrable and perfect, but that's when the expectation setting comes in. And nothing is going to be bulletproof, nothing's going to be foolproof, but we get as close to that mark as we can. And there's so many systems in place. You made mention of a couple of them, and so now in the world of AI and unified user interface that's bringing all of these disparate systems together, we are finding ourselves in scenarios where we want a mass notification alert at a campus for an organization to automatically trigger door locks or open certain doors in maybe an active shooter situation. So there's just so much by way of different integrations between the software and the physical that it's tough for it to be perfectly secure, right? Nobody wants to hear that, but we work through those things on a case by case, and oftentimes we find ourselves learning some really great best practices and ideas from one client that we can then pass on to the next. So I think through those conversations and exploring those concerns and those very unique scenarios, we're able to help all of our clients and in part the community provide a safer, more secure environment.
Well, Chris, I'm curious, because you guys live more in the connected and cloud side of things where you're bringing in all these disparate data sources, you have the ability to reach people that maybe were on the outside of the security conversation previously. I'm curious, what sorts of verticals are you seeing from an emerging standpoint? Obviously, we've got education. Obviously, we've got, enterprise infrastructure security, things like that. What sorts of verticals are you seeing kind of come out of the woodwork, maybe for the first time and rearing their head?
That's a great question. So we did get our start in higher education. That naturally morphed into local government. And, over the last 6-7 years, we've been really focused on growing our presence in what remains. And that's, broadly defined as corporate and healthcare. Healthcare, I think, was the next natural area for us to focus on given our early, kind of emergency critical alert focus. And, a lot of issues happening in the medical community. There's a lot of physical safety concerns there. Within corporate, it's interesting. The use cases we see are less. They still have some of the same physical security concerns, but we're seeing more and more concerns around automation. So, I'll give you an example: a large refrigeration company. If they have some type of an outage, it's obviously necessary for people to know. It's necessary for backup systems to kick on. So, if not, the net effect is, literally hundreds of thousands of dollars of lost inventory in those types of an event if their systems are offline for an hour. And so these are organizations that just have their business dialed into the penny and to the second. They know what's at risk, and we step in and we help them, put together these holistic solutions that will, help mitigate against those risks. So I wouldn't say that there's one in particular. I will say that across the corporate spectrum, where we are not focused on that physical security scenario, we are coming up with some and seeing some really unique scenarios, which is a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for our solutions architects. It's a lot of fun for our client success teams as well, to continue to support and continue to grow and enhance.
Well, Chris, I'll tell you, I love that you mentioned what I would call business critical applications, right? I think it's easy for folks like myself who live a lot of times in the world of security to say emergency alert and think fire, and to think, unfortunately active shooter and things like that. But there are so many business critical applications for this, right? Whether it's uptime, whether it's, hey, there's a leak, there's all these different things that could be happening from a business critical standpoint. I'm curious, who typically finds ownership of a lot of those, right? Is that primarily operations? Because a lot of times the security teams are not the ones who are accountable for the uptime of machines or uptime of power supply. Do you see sort of a crossover there between the ops and the security folks?
Yeah, a lot of crossover. In fact, sometimes in these conversations during the sales side and even in the ongoing support side, if you were outside looking in and just kind of fly on the wall in one of those conversations, you might not know who is who. You might not be able to easily identify which department or area they represent, because there is so much crossover. Upside to that is you have different perspectives, and that's something that's changed a lot even over the last decade. People used to be within the organizations we traditionally worked with were very siloed. And it would lead to longer decision-making timelines, because there was just a lot of infighting and a lot of different schools of thought. It's much more homogenized now, and I think one of the greatest benefits we've seen is you have more brain power, more collective IQ being brought to the table to solve challenges. And because people are coming from varied backgrounds, you're also getting different perspectives. So I think the solutions that we're helping to facilitate and find ourselves involved in with our clients are much more comprehensive and well thought, and they're coming to the fore much faster than they have in the past. So that's definitely something we've really enjoyed seeing.
Well, look, one of the good and bad things about having sort of a decentralized decision maker profile is that initial request can come from a lot of different places, right? It could come from your security side, it can come from your ops side, it can come, like you mentioned, from that HR side. So I want to ask, for people who maybe listen to this and saying, hey, look, this all sounds great and good, but I don't even know where to start, right? I've got a facility or an operations plant that I need to manage. How the heck do I even start the conversation? What are some of the best practices and ways that you might recommend people initiating that conversation?
I think the best way to initiate the conversation, I think, is just focusing on the simplicity of what type of action is going to be needed, or what type of threat are you facing, right? Is it something that if you distill the problem down, is this going to be a problem that requires immediate action? Is this going to be a serious threat? Understanding what the implications are, I think, is probably the easiest way. When you focus on that worst case scenario, when you look at the list of implications of not solving a group of problems or a very specific problem, that helps. I think that helps to makes it easier to more clearly define who needs to be involved. But anyone within an organization can start a conversation with us, certainly. We get folks that will call and actually ask questions very similar to what you asked. They'll say, hey, here's the problem that we're having. I'm not sure if I need to be having this conversation or if this is more of an IT thing. And we speak all languages, and it's necessary to do so. So we usually will end up asking some questions for them to dive a little bit deeper internally, and that usually helps them pull together the group that they're going to need to move a project forward. So sometimes we hear from people who already have a project put together, or they think they do, and then we hear from folks that are just in that very embryonic stage and really want us to help them construct it based on the best practices and processes that we've seen from their peers in their space.
Well, look, and I'm sure you guys just get questions all the time from people asking about best practices for leveraging AI for all sorts of different things. And how should how can I build this to scale in the future? All sorts of things. If you have those questions, obviously reach out to Chris and his team. I'll plug regroup.com, by the way. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch with them all. But, Chris, I want to land the plane with this. And I think this is probably the question that people have differing opinions on a lot. And that's what's next in the industry, right? I think that a lot of times, look, I love our industry and I love security and I love emergency response and all the public sector, all these things work together. But I think a lot of times we tend to put it nicely, to be about ourselves, right? And to be about, okay, what are we doing next? What are we going to try next? What do our partners need? And I think that we sometimes block out, hey, what could be? What could happen? How could we expand? And I want to ask, you think about the next 5-10 years, what could be next in the industry, right? What are some of the things that you'd love to see from an innovation standpoint or industry support standpoint in the next 5-10 years?
Yeah, I think, well, obviously AI plays a huge role in a lot of the innovation that we're seeing today and that we expected to see tomorrow. So I don't think that's any different for our industry. The level of automation that, we were already, seeing in kind of a pre-AI world was really impressive. And so I can tell you that, when I look down the road of what's coming next for Regroup and what I know some of our contemporaries are working on, it's very AI focused. I would like to see tools that some of the higher end tools and solutions that are offered in the space to the large multinational corporations that have the budget for it. I would like to see more of that being offered to the smaller mom and pops, because the need is the need exists there. When you think about that 80 student pre-K Montessori school, they have the same needs as a large university with $1 billion endowment. They certainly don't have the budget for it, and I'd like to see that change. I think with the progression of AI, I think with the progression of technology in general, we're already seeing the cost of things start to come down in some areas, but ultimately I'd like to see more access to the smaller guys. For the smaller guys, their scenarios are just as dire and just as important. So that's my hope.
Well, Chris, I'll second that. My daughter will be in daycare soon, and I hope that the daycare takes as serious as you mentioned that security, right? Because I love that juxtaposition of they have the same needs at different scales, right? And I think that's a great place to view, really a great lens to view the industry and our end user community. So I appreciate your context on that. But I'll tell you what, Chris, it was fantastic to have you on the show today. We've got to find a way to get you back on, but if we don't if we don't get you on soon, how can people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so regroup.com. Regroup.com, all of our information is there. We'd love to hear from anyone who is considering making any enhancements to their existing systems or just has general questions about the space and about mass notification. So we're here to help one way or other.
Well, wonderful. Thank you for your time today, Chris, and thank you all for tuning in. Be sure to like and subscribe. Check us out next time on the show.